Let me welcome everybody to this special session of the Center of Excellence in Biodiversity and Natural Resource Management weekly seminar. We have this weekly seminar, which is usually from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock. And we always have different speakers and interesting discussions. This week, in discussion with my colleague, Professor Johan Udling from University of Gothenburg in Sweden, we had been talking about native tree species, and I think partly because there's a lot of projects happening in Rwanda right now related to the use of native or indigenous tree species. And we have a project in the center with some of colleagues who are here on the panel, and we also on the panel we have a lot of different partners here who are doing different aspects of this work. Our project happens to be an academia industry partnership, and we're actually looking at a triple helix model. We're partnering with timber industry, academia, and the government. And we hope also quadruple, so with community. So this panel, we hope, will really explore some of these issues. We've got somebody from IUCN, Dr. Alan Ndoli, who has done research with agroforestry and biodiversity, ecosystem functioning in agroforestry systems. We have Dr. Ivan Gassangua from the Rwanda Forestry Authority. So he's representing the government, and we've had discussions with him. He's also very interested in the prospects of having indigenous tree species used in forestry in Rwanda. And then we have Klaas Jan Jonkman. He is with Sawmill East Africa Limited. It's a company, so we're excited to have an industry represented here talking about these issues. We have Dr. Miriam Mujawa Maria. She's a lecturer and a research associate with the center, a lecturer in the College of Science and Technology and Biology Department, and she's been doing research on forest ecology with colleagues who are here from Gothenburg University. And then we have Dr. Atanas Mukuralinda from ECRAF, and of course ECRAF has been doing a lot of research on biodiversity on farms and the importance of native species. We have Professor Johan Udling, mentioned before, from University of Gothenburg in Sweden, and he and his colleague who's also here as a participant. We hope to hear from you also, Joran, about their research with native species. And then we have Dr. Marguerite Mukangango. She is also at University of Rwanda, a lecturer in the College of Agriculture at University of Rwanda, and she's done research in agroforestry and fodder systems with livestock and agriculture. And then we have Dr. Michel Zera with Wildlife Conservation Society, and he has also a lot of experience working with ecosystem services and natural and protected areas, but also now working on a new project that will be looking at restoring landscapes using native or indigenous species. So I've run through that very quickly, and you will have an opportunity to hear from each of these people. Each person will have up to 6 minutes, so we hope you won't take more than 6 minutes, and it's fine if you take less than 6 minutes. I want to remind my colleagues Vanna and Jaslyn to please help with admitting people in the waiting room. And meanwhile, I'm going to now request our first speaker, Dr. Alan Ndoli, and I'm going to give you the floor, and we will hope you stay till 6 minutes. So thank you, Alan, and the floor is yours. And sorry, I just want to say one other quick thing before I mute myself. Please, everybody, if you have questions, please feel free to put them into the chat. And then we hope we have a very rousing, interesting discussion at the end. So at the end, you can unmute and talk your question, or we can read it out for you, either way. So over to you, Alan.
Thank you very much, Prof. Beth. Can you see my slide? Okay, thank you. I have only 2 slides, and I have chosen to talk about agroforestry, focus on agroforestry, given the time we have, and also the capacity we have in the room who can better talk on forestry side. So I am starting by the definition that I like from ICRAF, World Agroforestry Center back in 2013, whereby agroforestry was defined as the inclusion of trees in farming system and their management in rural landscapes to enhance, then I cite, productivity, profitability, diversity, but also ecosystem sustainability. So among the 4 objectives or clear targets, over the last 4 decades, I will say, we have seen the top 2 being the entry points and the last 2 objectives being left out. The productivity, which was leading more to, you know, when you focus more on productivity, then I will compare down the 4 criteria for agroforestry, the indigenous or the native tree species versus the exotic tree species. If, for instance, we check on productivity, we know exotic tree species from our experience in the country, in Rwanda, they are more fast-growing species. They recycle more nutrients. We have a wide range of, you know, deciduous and evergreen you can choose among. And then they also give straight woods and better timber and so on. Whereas for the native tree species, we see or have realized low productivity in agroforestry systems. And then they are just left in less intensive systems like silvopastoral systems. So they are low, slow growing, most of the native tree species we have in the country, and therefore their productivity in agroforestry systems are less attractive. The profitability, if I could compare the exotic versus the native, we have again the exotic being more profitable because they are fast growing, they good timber, value chains are there, and it's easy to be profitable than the native tree species. Some of my assumptions could be individual, don't associate it to IUCN or whatsoever. So the other 2 parts that I have put on the side, the diversity and ecosystem sustainability, which are part of the definition actually, are left behind, as I was saying previously. Exotic tree species tend, in the area where they are adopted, they tend to be, we tend to have less diverse landscapes. I've seen this in Rwanda, I have seen it in most of the countries in Eastern and Southern Africa where IUCN, our FLR hub, is working. For instance, in Rwanda, now that we have experts in the room here, you would agree with me that the southern and the eastern part of the country is dominated by Grevillea robusta, while the northern and the western part is dominated by Alnus acuminata in our agroforestry systems. So they tend to be monospecies, and the diversity that could be brought by native tree species are not there. On ecosystem sustainability, exotic tree species, actually, we have a couple of studies we are conducting, but given their nature of, you know, fast growing and, you know, monospecies, they tend to tap to more resources and may yield into unbalance in ecosystems if we compare to native tree species and native shrubs. So this said, I'm just trying to show why in Rwanda we are having more exotic tree species in the agroforestry landscapes than the native tree species. The reason is simply because we are more focusing on productivity and profitability while leaving out the diversity and ecosystem sustainability aspects of
Sorry, somebody needs to mute.
Yes, please, that would be very helpful. Good. So on the gaps, if I can just summarize myself to be short, I just highlighted 2 gaps per each objective in the last 2 objectives of agroforestry. The first one is the gaps in the tree reproductive materials, especially in the techniques for native tree species propagations. most of colleagues here would agree with me that we are still, even as when we are planning for projects, you would rather use exotic because you are sure of the survival rates, all data are there, and seeds and everything is available. But for the native, this is there is still a lot of things to be done. The second gap is also the value chain and supply chains for native tree species, which are not developed at all. And only the last few years, we have seen some wood from Malchemia and Mesopsis. But other than that, we only used to have exotic wood in our shops here. For ecosystem sustainability, I highlighted one big gap that I felt is dominating, is the economic analysis and evaluation of agroforestry in terms of sustainability, ecosystem sustainability. And this should really be focused on beyond productivity and profitability, because these two are equally important as the diversity and ecosystem sustainability in agroforestry systems. Allow me to end up here, and I remain available for questions and discussions. Thank you very much, Beth.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm sure there's going to be quite a few comments and questions from your presentation. Thank you very much. So our next speaker is Dr. Michel Massa Zera. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Michel, and just remind people to feel free to put your comments into the chat.
Yeah, thank you, Beth, and thank you, Ale, for that kind of a good introduction. It gives us the perspective, and it will help us who take over from you to frame well the issues. So, and I'll go straight to the Rwandan context. But let me start with first, when we talk about landscape restoration, what are we trying to achieve? My understanding is about improving degraded lands, to rebuild the ecological integrity, and to enhance people's livelihood. So when you look at many landscape restoration across the continent, they try to address the productivity and profitability. And few projects that they try to address the issue of diversity and ecological integrity. And just to put that in the context of Rwanda, I've been involved in the design of Green Climate Fund projects that aims at restoring the larger Congo-Nile Divide landscape from Nyungwe to the Volcanoes National Park. And one of the questions, something we wanted to do to see is how can we integrate native species in landscape restoration. But there are few challenges I've seen talking to communities, talking to different stakeholders. One is the knowledge about the native species. Local communities, they know the native species, they know the ecology, they know the values. But when it comes to our scientific knowledge, how we can multiply indigenous species, we have few, I mean, you can go to the Tree Seed Center, you can talk to RAP, even ICRAF, other organizations involved in landscape restoration. We have limited knowledge on how to deal with native tree species. The second challenge talking to communities is about benefits and profitability. So when you look at local communities' mind when they think about investing on their agricultural land, it's about profitability. And their time preference is very high. They need to eat food now, not wait for tomorrow. When you think about a native tree species, it will take more than 25 years to mature in order to get profit. And the third challenge in the context of Rwanda, Rwanda is a human-dominated landscape. You cannot talk about planting a tree or restoring with a native tree species without thinking about you're planting a tree on agricultural land. And it's about 0.3 hectares per household. So the reason Grevillea and other species have been accepted because they allow communities to grow food on the agricultural land. So again, with the limited knowledge we have on this native tree species, the propagation has been a challenge. So that's something we are trying to address in our project, because the current policy framework allows for planting native tree species for protective forest. Everything above 55% degree slope, the current forest policies allows for planting indigenous species. So that can create an opportunity for integrating indigenous species into in the landscape restoration. But on private land, we need different mechanisms. We need some kind of incentives for local community to accept and adopt these species, in addition to improving our knowledge related to indigenous species. So that's what I can say based on the last year I've been involved in designing this landscape restoration. Those are the critical challenges I've seen so far. Over to you, Beth.
Great. Thank you so much, Michel. And I think, again, we've got some interesting fodder for thought here, complementing what Alain and Dolly contributed. And I think this information is kind of building on each other right now.
I think we lost you, Beth.
Hello, Betty. We lost you. Are you still there? Hello, Beth. Let me call her.
Atanas, we cannot hear you.
I don't hear Beth.
No.
We can hear you now, and maybe you can start talking.
Okay, so
Atanas,
I think according to the program, I think it's my turn.
Yes.
So Beth knows what I'm gonna say anyway, so I hope she will come back, but I think it's okay if I start. So I share my screen, and I'm gonna talk about results from the Rwanda Tree project. So Rwanda Tree stands for Rwanda Tropical Elevation Experiment, an experiment to explore the climate responses of tropical trees. Yeah, so we have collaborated with the University of Rwanda, so the University of Gothenburg and University of Rwanda since 2004. And the early work was mostly done by Dr. Nsabimana and Nyarambangutse, who wrote their PhD thesis on carbon stocks and carbon cycling, with Göran Wallin as supervisor on the Nyungwe forest and the Arboretum of Rwanda. We've had rich student exchange over the years, so students going in both directions. But what I will tell you about now is our most recent project, so Rwanda Tree, which was initiated in 2016. And the idea is to use sites at different elevations and establish plantations at each site to explore the climate sensitivity of different Rwandan native tree species. Half of the species come from Segera, are planted in Segera and come from the Nyungwe area. and are planted at Zera, Rwanda, and Makera at different elevations with different temperatures, different precipitation. And the other half comes from Rwanda in Huye. About half of the species are early successional and the other half is late successional. This is the map of one site. So at a site we have 18 plots. And in each plot there are 100 trees, 5 replicates of each of the 20 species. We also have different treatments. So we have 3 water levels, high, intermediate, and low, and we have 2 fertility levels, so either unfertilized or fertilized plots. This is what a plantation looks like from above. This is from Rwanda in February 2020. And the main topics of our study is to explore the climate sensitivity of the trees in different aspects and their mortality, so which species die in a warmer climate or in a drier climate and why, but also the potential for using them in plantation programs using native tree species. So in 2016, we collected seeds that were propagated in nurseries. We built houses. We established weather stations. We built irrigation systems. We constructed rainout shelters. And finally, we planted the trees in late 2017. And this is what it looked like 2 years later at Makera. So we had a little forest. And now 2 years further along the road, some trees are really big, between 10 and 15 meters. We have one part of the team in Rwanda where we have 4 PhD projects. One of them is finalized. It's by Miriam. She will present after me. And one part of the team is in Gothenburg. Now I'll tell you some about the results well, we have published results on climate responses of mature trees, photosynthesis, leaf respiration, physiological heat tolerance, leaf morphology and chemistry. And Miriam will tell you more about some of this in the next presentation, but what I will show you about now is growth and mortality responses after 2 years. And then you should bear in mind that the first 1.5 years, we irrigated all plants to get good establishment. After that, we also have drought treatments. And you can see that some species, they do really well in a warm climate. So Faurea saligna here, for example, no, they do not do very well. Faurea saligna here, you can see that the slowest growth is in Makera in the red color, whereas other species, they're stimulated in their growth in a warm climate, like Bridelia here. And other species don't care. Looking at data for all 20 species, the blue color is Zera, the yellow is Rwanda, and the red is Makera. You can see that many species grow best in Makera. This is particularly the case for early successional fast-growing species, that they're really stimulated by warming. Whereas other species that are more slow-growing and come from the tropical montane area, they do not like the warmer climate. When we look at mortality, it's also these late successional species that suffer mortality. We can give examples of species that deal well with heat and other species that do not perform very well in a warmer climate. The successful species are often early successional, but not always. Also species like Prunus africana, Ficus toningi, Afropodocarpus do well in a warm climate. Unsuccessful species are often late successional, but sometimes they're early successional from the montane areas like Makaranga and Massa. So these are preliminary results on warming responses. Now we have 2 years more data after that to assess drought sensitivity, and that is under progress. Since different groups of species respond differently, we also get the different community composition at the different sites. In the cool site Makera, they are dominated by species from higher elevation, in particular the early successional species from higher elevation. Whereas at Makera, these stands are dominated by the lower elevations of the transitional rainforest species, in particular the early successional ones. If you want to learn more about the project, then visit our website, rwandatree.com. And these are the collaborating institutions and the funding sources. And by that, I thank you.
Great, thank you so much. It's really exciting to see some data that show the potential for these native species. It comes on the heels of comments from our colleague Alain and from Michelle. So we're going to build now on more of the data, and I would like to invite Dr. Miriam Mujawa Maria, who, as Johan mentioned, they've been working together with a large team on some of these issues, so we can understand how native tree species can adapt to different climates and the issues, kind of what raised by Alain and Michelle, but what do we know about these species? So Miriam, I'd like to pass it over to you.
Thank you very much, Beth. I will continue with the Rwanda tree studies, and I will talk about the physiological responses to warming in these trees that Professor Johan has presented. Most of the studies are about photosynthesis, and some studies were conducted on field-grown plants, others are on potted field study, and also some other trees were studied in chamber. Photosynthesis response to warming. Here I have leaf temperature increase from left to right, and then photosynthesis increases by increase in temperature up to certain temperature, which we call optimum temperature. And then above that optimum temperature, photosynthesis declines. What happens when a plant is grown at warmer and cooler environment? When a plant is growing at cooler environment, it is represented here by the blue curve. And when you grow the same plant at warm environment, then photosynthesis shifts this optimum temperature towards a warmer temperature. This is the same for photosynthetic biochemical processes, maximum risk of carboxylation and also electron transport rate. They also shift their optimum temperature towards warmer temperature when grown at the warmer temperatures. Mostly these are grown, measured at 25 degrees. Starting with field studies at the Rwanda tree sites, we have 20 species, as Johan said, and this study looked at 10 early successional species and 8 late successional species, and photosynthesis here was measured at the growth temperature at each site. The results shows that we have a higher elevation site to lower elevation site from left to right. And we have Zera site, Rwanda, which is intermediate, and the Massa, which is the lowest site. The gray bars represent photosynthetic rate in early successional species or pioneer species, while the white bars represent photosynthesis in late successional species. These results showed negative warming responses in photosynthesis in the late successional species, the white bars. It shows that photosynthesis declines when plants are grown at the warmer sites. While for early successional species, this was not the case. This is the same for carboxylation capacity, which shows a decline at warmer site in late successional species, while it's not the same thing in early successional species. While late successional species are very sensitive to high temperature, this is because they have a higher temperature due to inefficient cooling in transpiration. The data are strongly supported by growth data on the same species. We also assessed how seasonal drought affects photosynthesis, and data were taken during early dry season, the green bars, and some data were taken in late dry season with the pink bars. It turned out that drought reduced photosynthesis at the two warmer sites, Rwanda and Massa, while it didn't at the cooler site, which is Zera. At warmer site, we have both warming and the dry season that forced plant to cause the stomata, so that photosynthesis was reduced in the plant grown there. Another study that was conducted on field plants assessed heat stress and heat tolerance And this is the study by California et al. 2021. We have all the 20 species here and leaf temperature. While you're measuring leaf temperature at the three sites, the blue is the high elevation site, Zera. The pink one is Rwanda, which is intermediate elevation site, and the orange one is Makera, the lowest elevation site. It has been shown that leaves can reach very high temperatures that can permanently damage them, and leaf temperature can go above 10 up to 15 degrees warmer than the air temperature. Also, maximum leaf temperature varies among different species. This study also looked at the heat tolerance among the species, and this was examined in 3 species. We have Harungana montana, which is Pioneer, and Syzygium and Antandrophragma in green color. Both the two, Syzygium and Antandrophragma, are late successional species or climax species. Here we have a T15 representing the leaf temperature at which thermotolerance is, at which chlorophyll fluorescence is reduced by 50%. This heat thermotolerance was measured by that chlorophyll fluorescence. Then it was shown that all the species were able to acclimate their heat tolerance, and the raw transpiring species, which is Antandrophragma in green color here, had the highest heat tolerance, but this one experienced the highest leaf temperature and also the lower thermoset margin. Species were also explored in a potted. The pot were placed at the 3 sites of Rwanda tree, and these are 2 species that were explored. One is Syzygium guineense in the pot here, you can see the picture, and another one is Harungana montana. This study also explored how the thermal optimum of photosynthesis can shift with warming, and among the 2 species, none of them showed the shift in the optimum with warming. This is what it shows here with Harungana montana. In that all species, they didn't shift clearly significantly with warming, the same for Syzygium. This is the study by Dusenge et al. 2021. Another study was conducted in a chamber in Gothenburg. This is the study by Whitman, and it explored 4 species and with 2 different provenance. Massa lanceolata and Ficus were coming from high altitude, and Croton, Megalopalpus, and Maricamia rutea were from low altitude. Both early and late successional species, Whitman et al. Explored their responses, their photosynthetic responses to temperature. 18 plants for each species were grown in 3 treatments. The temperature treatment, the first temperature is for daytime, while the second one is for nighttime. The results have shown that for the 4 species, only 2 species shifted the optimum temperature, and one of them is Massa lanceolata, and another one is this Maricamia rutea. While for Ficus toningi and Croton, there was no shift in optimum temperature. These 2, they had a shift in contrasting direction, to mean that the reason for this contrast, the grown Massa to cold environment made use of cold temperature as it is coming from high elevation, while Maricamia rutea also made the use of higher temperature since it's coming from the raw elevation side. What are the implications of all these physiological responses to tree plantation? With respect to those physiological warming responses, we have seen that pioneer or early successional species do better at warmer climate, while some species with high leaf temperatures, they suffer most at warmer side, and these are often late successional species, but also some early successional species with larger leaves, they suffer during droughts. It is also highlighted that lower elevation species cope better with warming. Taken together, both physiology and growth data they suggest that lower elevation early successional species would be the best candidate for plantation in the open settings such as agroforestry, while some late successional species may work in plantation forest, of course, for their conservation, carbon stock, but also for their high quality of wood. Thank you very much. Over to you, Beth.
Okay, great. Thank you, Miriam. It's, again, as always, it's really nice to see data that can help inform how we can integrate native tree species. So I'm going to move now to our colleague, Dr. Atanaz, and he also has quite a wealth of experience in using native tree species, especially in agroforestry and agroecology systems. So Atanaz, I'm going to turn it over to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. And I think I'm lucky to speak after these experienced people in, with indigenous knowledge. So for me, I think I emphasize what other people didn't say. In terms of the benefits to have these indigenous species in agricultural landscape, the first one is biodiversity. The study we did in biodiversity, increased tree on farm on for increasing biodiversity, show that the indigenous species attract more birds than exotic species. And also you found more insect there. And that is have an implication on agriculture productivity because they are pollinators and also they regulated these pests and diseases. And that is very important. Another issue, for example, for the case, the context of Rwanda, you know that Rwanda put more emphasis on a protected area because they generate more incomes than coffee. So there is, it's very important when you develop these indigenous species outside of natural forest or protected area, you give an opportunity to farmer to reduce the encroachment to the natural forest. Another one, these species are known by the community, they have advantage, protected them is also very, another benefit because you keep it in the agricultural landscape and the farmer can use it. So I think that is very, very important. In terms of opportunity, I don't come to it. Many people talk about it in terms of landscape restoration and also in terms of adaptability or suitability, if I say it better. Because these indigenous species, you are not starting this participatory trial to see where they are adapted. They are already known where they are adapted. So that is also an opportunity to use them. There is also a good working with the government to promote these indigenous species, as I said, the area. It is an opportunity because the government needs to protect this protected area. Then they need those species like by farmer to bring it outside of the forest. So in terms of the costs, they are very high costly because they stay long in the nursery and they some species and they require long maintenance. Even in the field, they require more long maintenance so that it is very costly. There is also domestication method for some indigenous species like fragment. It needs shade to grow better outside of the forest and the banana and the things. This is a cost, they cost a lot of money and they require more attention. So in terms of potential, that is a sustainability and also resistance to the diseases. If you see like eucalyptus, you see it was attacked by insects, but indigenous species resisted better because they are familiar with the environment, they are familiar with the condition, soil condition pre-existing in the indigenous area. So I think that is they present the potential than exotic species. But in terms of knowledge gap, most is in terms of domestication. Some species require additional knowledge to be able to domesticate them. Like Antandocophragma, for example, you need to know that they need shade to grow better. Like Mitragena species, you must know how to multiply these species outside of the forest. So that is, I think, which this is knowledge gap. And some people don't know the knowledge of how they grow, the growth of these species. They say only by slow grow, something like that, but they don't have evidence to say that these species are growing slow. Like Vernonia amygdalina is growing very fast than other exotic species. So this knowledge need to put them together to be able to feed the community which wanted to bring outside these indigenous species outside from natural forest to in agricultural landscape. But this require also multidisciplinarity. The one team cannot manage to do that. You need more team like Joan and the student from University of Rwanda did. You need a team to know how this species will resist to the temperature, how this species we can multiply these species, how these species will be adopted by the farmer. So I think multidisciplinary team can be work on domestication of indigenous species. Saying that, over to you, Beth. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Atanaz. It's really good to hear your thoughts, given you have a lot of experience with this issue. And yeah, thank you for some of those suggestions and recommendations. I am now going to invite Dr. Ivan Gassangua from the Rwanda Forestry Authority, and I welcome him. He is working with a government agency, and of course, there's a lot of real interest there on the side of the government to know how to approach this issue of using native species. So, Ivan, I'm going to turn it over to you. Welcome.
Hello, Beth, and everyone in the room. Thank you very much for having me, and it is really a pleasure to hear from different experts, different people from different organizations, from different endeavors. It's really a great honor and a great pleasure to be interacting with people who are familiar in the sector. And actually, most of the people on the panel actually work with the Rwanda Forestry Authority. Well, I do not have a lot to speak, as most of the things, most of the challenges and the opportunities, mostly the challenges have been elaborated by the colleagues who spoke before me. I just want to highlight some few things that some people tackled on and tackled about, especially on the challenges like everyone mentioned. Obviously, Rwanda, I'm talking in the aspect of the Rwandan landscape, which, of course, you know, the land size of the country is not that very much accommodative to all the forestry actions, forest plantations that we on a daily basis do, that can be able to be accommodated because of the land size. So I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes.
Yes,
right,
it's
so
fine.
among the challenges, like
Yes.
like the colleagues who spoke before me highlighted, the land competition we have, of course, we have a limited space land to plant forests and trees. There is a land competition against other sectors like settlement, infrastructure, and agriculture, and of which most of the times people do not even give tree plantation a priority over to agriculture, food production that comes before any other intervention like agroforestry. But like many of the colleagues mentioned, there are a lot of things that have to change, the mindset. Agriculture can coexist together with the forests, with the trees in the farms. So it has to be the innovative ideas of different colleagues, of different institutions, different partners, to innovate the ways and to educate the communities, the farmers, how this can actually coexist. Of course, the communities, the farmer communities, there is a low adoption of these native plant species or native tree species, like Dr. Ale mentioned, because of a lot of challenges, including the productivity, the profitability challenges that are in production or availability of native tree species, for example. Someone here mentioned about the native tree species taking too long to actually produce a harvest, to how to be harvestable. And when you compare the profit of planting a native tree species and compared to planting an exotic plant tree species like a gravelia, you find that the farmers or the communities will easily adopt the exotic species that grow faster, that actually provide them with more incentives like firewood for trees and shrubs for fuel, for firewood that they use on a daily basis to cook. And there is also another challenge of tree reproductive materials availability. As a lot of landscapes have changed from the forestry landscape to settlement to agricultural landscape, this has contributed a lot to the reduced number of species that are available in the landscape. And the few species that are left could be found in the protected areas, in which sometimes, in some cases, are protected, that no one is allowed to just go and, get a certain a TRM or a seed or any sapling that could be multiplied and be planted all around the country or in their own neighborhoods. So there are some challenges considering at the community level, at the implementers level, at different stakeholders levels. But although we have talked a lot more about the challenges, but there are some opportunities like some of the colleagues here mentioned. If I talk from the aspect of the government policies, strategies, missions, and visions, you find that the government has, there is a national national forest policy that is in place. That currently the forest policy is under revision, by the way, of which is considering the plantation of native tree species. Now, if there is an opportunity that the policy considers the plantation and the promotion of indigenous and native tree species, that is an opportunity that all the people in the sector have to make use of. And there is a lot of other strategies. If you can see my screen, there is tree reproductive materials strategy, which emphasizes to the plantation and planting of native tree species. And there is also a forest sector strategic plan, which promotes plantation of forest not only in the protected areas or the public forest areas, but also in agroforestry. There is a plan for, there is also an agroforestry strategic plan that the government puts in place to devise, to guide people in the sector, interventions in the sector, how this could be done. Now, one of other opportunities that that was previously available, but not to its maximum or its full capacity, is that there is a law that established the Rwanda Forestry Authority that was institutionalized in 2020, which gives it a capacity or an opportunity to manage and to protect the forests in the country. The Rwanda Forestry Authority also has an opportunity of having forest research division in it, or currently in which we find the tree seed centers. We recently opened a tree seed center in Gassangua. We only had one at CoEB, which was previously a problem because the effectiveness on deliverables of the tree seed centers to deliver the native tree species that were at a low rate adopted, it was a very big challenge. But currently having an institution mandated to protect and manage and plant these native tree species to promote these policies, strategies, and plans of the government, it is an opportunity that everyone in the sector can tackle in and make use of, so that we can, in our endeavors, we can move forward. I know we have been working with a lot of colleagues in here. We work with IUCN, we work with ICRAF, we work with the Center of Excellence for Biodiversity, we work with the University of Gothenburg, and so many others in the room. So these opportunities, if we maximized the efforts, working together, the collaboration in terms of research, in terms of the activities that we're doing, we could overcome some of the challenges that we saw and some of the colleagues mentioned earlier. So there are currently, together with different partners, there are a lot of interventions that we are working on. There is a lot of projects that are going on in Rwanda Forestry Authority in partnership with the stakeholders and the partners here, and some of others are not here as well. We have a forest landscape restoration project in Amayaga. I think one of the colleagues here mentioned about when you look at the Eastern Province and you look at the Amayaga region, which is southern region of the country, you find that they are dominated by one type of species, or at least two. They are monospecies at least two, if I would say. Now, there are a lot of interventions that are coming in to actually diversify these species that are in these landscapes. And most of these interventions are coming in with native or indigenous tree species to replant or to plant these species in the landscapes. If we're talking about the forest landscape restoration, of course, we are talking about the ecosystem restoration. We need to bring back some of these species that have been ignored, that are at the edge of extinction or that are threatened. So not only are we working in Amayaga region, which is the southern province, but we have a lot of other projects that are going on in Eastern Province, like this forest landscape restoration, which we work together with IUCN, that is promoting native tree species in Nyagatare and Kirehe districts. We have other interventions that are coming in. Some that the TREPA project and Kombio project are starting in this year. So all these projects here are promoting plantation of native tree species, indigenous native tree species. So it is our intention and our desire to collaborate, to work together with the partners here to actually, the researchers here basically, to advise, to provide some of these native tree species, considering the geographical context that we're working in, that we find the conducive or suitable tree species that can easily be adopted in these regions. This will facilitate in these projects. There are interventions that we hope and we wish that can produce incentives to the communities for an increased rate of adoption of these native tree species. So I probably took too long, but I will finish here, and I will welcome the questions, the comments on the interventions or the challenges that we have. Like some of people here mentioned about Tree Seed Center, the challenges it has. When the open discussion comes, then we can get to the questions, answering the questions. Thank you, Beth, and I get back to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Ivan. That was really, really great to hear from government and government partner about the projects and the challenges and the interests. Now we're going to hear from an industry partner. So I'm going to welcome Klaas Jonkman, and he works in the timber industry. He works closely with the Rwanda Forestry Authority, and we also have a project with him and his company, Sawmill East Africa, an academia industry partnership, and also with government, where we are exploring some of these issues of use of native species. So I'd like to turn it over to Klaas. I think he'll provide very interesting perspective from the timber industry. So welcome, Klaas. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. You can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for the honor to be on this panel. If I hear all those panelists and I see all the discussions in the chat, I think we're almost there. Eh? We only have to combine it. That's a joke. I'm from Sawmill East Africa, so we're doing a forest concession on 5,000 hectares on the moment. The traditional forestry way, which is mainly now based on species of eucalyptus and pine. Now, the first thing I want to mention is that if I look at the speakers and they speak about profitability, I think we have to divide a bit. There's the traditional forestry, as we as foresters are running a business in Rwanda, is not a common practice. The use of wood has been a part of life. I think still almost all of the people in Rwanda are using wood or wood waste on a daily basis to cook their food. I think that's the basis of how the wood industry and the forest use in Rwanda is formed today. So as I want to look a bit at it, like combining everything that people say, I think that we should think about like what is the use of this forest today, and then also look at the word profitability, because if I look at the way it's organized today, I am supposed to reforest the forest that we are using today with maybe exotic species, but maybe in the future with indigenous species. But it's all based on a very, very long-term way of thinking. And I think in everything we start to do now, we should start to engage all the partners, which we're doing today, which is absolutely fantastic. And then I can say government for the way they see the forestry in the long term, academia to give us the answers we maybe don't know ourselves. The communities because they are today the biggest provider of the wood in all directions. And I think the panel should understand that also industry is only a small player on this market. If you go to the wood markets, most of the wood will come from private forests. And then we can go back to this profit thing where I keep talking about. There's so many more things than only profit. I think the way a small farmer can look at profit from a tree compared to how I should look at it, well, I have all the obligations that I have towards the forestry authorities and the way I have my company organized is so different that it's almost impossible to compare. So I'm really looking for ways to implement the things we are finding together. And I think there's a responsibility for us as bigger forestry owners together with government to take the lead in this, because as many of the people before me said, the smaller forest owners or plantation holders are very depending on a fast income. And we should be the ones planning for long-term reforestation and improving of the forest and the degraded forest. So I am hoping for a discussion about how we could find the answers of the tree species that are most suitable for both biodiversity, nature, and also maybe the ones that we can use for production, because I'm very, very agreeing with some of the, at least in the chat, I see a lot of people saying, I think there's much more to grow than we know. I think most of the reforestation has been done of availability, not so much only about productivity. Because as also some of the speakers said, it's not easy to find the seeds of the indigenous trees. So those things we cannot expect the smaller farmers to do. I see that's the finish of what I want to say. I see opportunities in big companies, investors that are looking for compensating their carbon offset. Even though Rwanda is a small country with small forests, we also are a manageable country where you could maybe find very interesting pilot studies in how you could combine the planting of indigenous trees, maybe selective harvesting, and partly productive areas in not too big forest, together with local community that could benefit almost everyone involved. That would be the way I think where also forestry could have a long-term profitability. So that was what I wanted to say. I thank everybody for joining, and I also think that this is a really good opportunity to, I mean, I know many people from this panel, but also to learn to know new people with new ideas. And I think if we work close together, we can really achieve things as working with Rafa and with academia. I can also say that there's more and more big investors approaching us as industry in how they could join this challenge for indigenous species returning into African forests. So that's a very, very promising development. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Klaas, for that really great perspective. What we really thought about a lot with this panel was getting all these different perspectives from researchers in the government and industry, people working with different kinds of communities, different constraints. So I'm really pleased to have that all of you were able to join and talk in your different areas or sectors. And so now we want to open it up. I'm going to open up the chat space here and see what we have. And I'm going to go back to the beginning. I did, because I was dropped from the chat. I have the ones that go back to when I was able to rejoin, but my colleague Vinant was able to send me a document with the earlier ones. So I'm going to start going back a bit here. Let's see, there's quite a few really interesting discussions. Also, I want to welcome people to put your hand up. There's a function for raising your hand here, and then you can unmute when you're called on and speak directly to the panel. But to get things going, we have a question here from Alphonse. How can you increase the knowledge of local people on the use of native tree species in agroforestry as a measure to mitigate climate change? And I would just like to open that up. I don't know who would like to give a response to that. I know that we have a participant here, Emmanuel Munyaneza, who's done a lot of work with traditional knowledge and communities, and he was responding to some of that. But if anyone from the panel would like to give a try at responding to that, and I also invite Emmanuel. Anyone from the panel, unmute and you can give a response.
Okay, maybe let me give it the first attempt, because
Thank you.
it's a long way to go, but it's a possible way, because before Grivelia landed to Rwanda, agriculturalists used to grow trees, and they were okay with what they knew and what they had. I recall one, I like the quotation from Steve Jobs, who said, people don't know what they want until you show it to them. So if they get enough exposure, and if knowledge and incentives are available to the farmers, they would quickly adopt back the indigenous or the native tree species. So I will just resume this into, or summarize this into only two things. The first one is to create the enabling environment for the native tree species, which includes the incentives and all the motivations. And the two is also to avail the tree reproductive materials, which are missing. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Go ahead.
Yes, I would like also to emphasize that local knowledge with elder people, like we did recently with these people from Nyamagabe and Ruguru, really it is a good entry point to introduce these indigenous species in agricultural landscape outside of natural forest, because they know the benefit, particularly medicine and probably timber they don't have. You found that these indigenous species, even farmers have some negative attitude, but because NGOs and other development organizations and research are pushing to get a quick result from these exotic species fast to grow, farmers adopt that than indigenous species. But indigenous species also have advantage. So the best way to increase these indigenous species in agricultural landscape is, for example, to dialogue with these elder people, but also to prioritize indigenous species preferred by farmer, but which is very easy for domestication, also which have useful benefit from this farmer. If I say like Vernonia amygdalina or Maricamia, you found everywhere. When you go to Musanze, to Nyabihu, or to Gisenyi, you found that Maricamia is protected by farmer. Those species protected by farmer, you start by there, because already farmer have knowledge, prefer this species, and you start a dialogue, and this will be entry point for other species. Thank you. Over to you, Beth.
Good, thank you. I don't know if anybody else from the panel or the audience would like to comment before we move on.
Betty, yes, Betty, can I comment?
Yes, please.
Yeah,
Elias.
Yeah, I would like to say that our local communities, they can domesticate some indigenous trees. We have seen that, and we published some papers about that, especially about indigenous fruit trees. We saw that in many areas in the country, local community have domesticated some indigenous fruit trees like Garcinia buchanani, like Mirianthus holisti, like many other indigenous fruits that they keep in their agrosystems. Parallel to that, they have also domesticated some cultural plant species. They are indigenous. We have very big trees that have been domesticated by people, like these big trees that we encounter in Ikirehe, Terigota, Mildibredi. They are only in Ikirehe and Ngoma. You have also some cultural plants that are really really been domesticated by local communities, and the medicinal plants as well. This is, I think it depends on the interest of the population to domesticate indigenous trees. All we need is just to demonstrate the profitability of those trees if they do not, if the local community do not know that. I do not know. Yes, Betty, as I have the floor, can I give a recommendation to Rwanda Forestry Authority and REMA probably? Yeah, from these presentations, we saw very nice presentations from Yudling, from Miriam, from Mondoli, from Zera, from all these panelists. It was really very exciting. And we saw that we have that trees that are adapted to warm conditions. And those trees have been grown easily. It means that the techniques, the growth techniques of those trees are now known. And we would like, we saw that the benefits of indigenous trees, and we saw the constraints, the challenges from the local communities to adopt them immediately. But we have an entry point. We have public spaces. We have public properties. You will see, for instance, in dry areas like Kayonza, like Nyagatare, Gatsibo, Bugesera, Kirehe, Ngoma, where people are growing eucalyptus in dry areas instead of growing these native species. I think that in public spaces, we can develop a project or influence some policymakers to develop projects so that they can grow indigenous species in public spaces. This is feasible while waiting for the local communities to adopt them or to domesticate them. This is my recommendation to Rwanda Forest Authority and probably to REMA as well. We should really take advantage of these findings that we have and start doing something. For researchers, as we are, as academia or any other researcher, I think that we got a very good experience from a tree, Rwanda tree. It is a very good experience. We should experiment to other species because they worked only around 20 tree species. We should expand this to all trees that we have in Rwanda, and probably expand this to shrubs so that we can get a baseline data that we can use for climate change adaptation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Those are some great suggestions. Thanks very much. I just realized that I neglected to introduce Marguerite, Dr. Marguerite from the College of Agriculture. So before we continue with more questions and comments, I would like to invite Marguerite to go ahead and give your comments on the panel. And I'm very sorry that I skipped over you. So welcome, Marguerite.
Thank you very much, Beth. Okay, what I can say about this indigenous tree species in forestry and agroforestry. The first is that the forest area are disappearing, and there is also land degradation. And we can say that those native species can provide even the products and services that all exotic species can also provide. And also those native tree species can also be integrated in agroforestry, as they can provide different products and services and food, or that exotic tree species can provide. We can also emphasize on the fact that those native species are climate resilient. They have different ecosystems, they are adapted. So when they are used in the land for land restoration or reforestation, they should be given priority, because they will not face or will be less affected by the climate change. So those are some pros and cons of exotic and native tree species in forest and agroforestry. The gap that we face in in using native species, they are lack of research, or they are very few on native tree species regarding the ecosystems, the propagation, also the management. These are the key point entry to promote the native species to be used in agroforestry. So there is also the inclusion of community in research with the academia, and also promoting these native tree species in land restoration. There is also a lack of planting material as gap, but mainly it's because even where the native species are in those protected area. But with advancement of research and multiplying the planting material, maybe they can be accessed and increase the diversity of tree species in forestry and agroforestry species used in agroforestry practices. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you so much, Marguerite. And I do apologize for starting the questions and comments before inviting you to speak. But thank you for those comments. You really clarified some of the gaps and constraints, and those are actually really nice for research agenda, and also in collaboration with industry and the government and the communities. So I would like to go back to some of the comments. I see, Ivan, you have your hand up. Would you like to make a comment? The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to just give a comment to the few concerns that have been raised by the colleagues and the recommendations from from Dr. Bizuru and Marguerite. And well, yes, there are one of the challenges, or as the person who asked the question clearly put, what can we do to increase the adoption, to increase the knowledge, the awareness in the communities, so they can easily adopt to plant these native tree species. Some people say this availability of the suitable environment as an incentive. Yes, like some of the colleagues in the chat mentioned, people do not, they are worried they cannot be having 0.5 hectares of land and then they wait for 50 or 20 or 15 years to get a harvest of the trees that they planted. So they want something that is quick, quick return. And this is something very challenging when you are in a forestry sector. And when you're dealing with the research, you need to produce the results as the consumers or the farmers, the communities want it. But I think what we can do is we have, at least from the side of RFA, we are in a session of identifying these native tree species, some of which that can grow faster, some of which that can provide incentives like firewood for the farmers. I'm talking about the native tree species that we're identifying. And these tree species that we are identifying, we are trying to propagate, developing the propagation manuals of it. We want them to be planted all around in our landscapes. But it is quite a very big challenge to have all we need in a very short time. That is why I call upon actually the stakeholders here and the partners, the researchers who are here, to actually collaborate, join hands together so that we can produce these. Join hands, I mean joining the research, bring the researchers together, provide information together, share the information so that we can actually speed up some of the researches, some of the results that the communities want and desire. For the availability of tree reproductive materials, in our nurseries, like I told you earlier, we have a tree seed center at Huye and Gatsibo. We have nurseries. We have nurseries in Huye, we have nurseries in Gatsibo, we have nurseries in Kigali. So, but these nurseries cannot produce as much as we want. If we want to plant 10 million trees, native tree species, we cannot be able to produce all this. That is why we probably have to work together with researchers in their experimental fields. Yes, it could be experimental, but if it is a material that we can put in the landscape, we can work together to multiply for the synergies. And for the recommendation of using the public areas to grow the native tree species or plant species. Yes, in the projects that are going to be implemented in different areas of the country, yes, this is one of the approach that we have adopted, because there is not enough landscape, there is not enough area to grow these trees. People, I mean the communities, the farmers, do not understand the essence, the importance, and what they're going to gain from planting these trees. So it is an opportunity. It is, in fact, if I can add, we have so very many remnant forests that are degraded, and these are the forests that we are going to be rehabilitating, replanting some of these tree species into, so that we can also show to the farmers, like Dr. Bizuru was saying, there are fruit trees that people are starting to adopt. They are adopting it. They are adopting this tree. I mean, fruit trees, because they have seen that they can work. So it is important that all of us here and people who are not here, we share the information, we exchange so that we can speed up the adoption the plantation and the forest landscape restoration at large. So, those are the comments that I wanted to add to the questions and the comments added by the colleagues here. Thank you, Beth. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is just really exciting, all the comments coming out, and I'm trying to capture some of the thematic areas, but definitely what's been raised several times by you and other panel members is the importance of collaboration, a multidisciplinary approach, and sharing information. And we do hope that platforms like this panel can help move towards that, and we do see that as a role of this center, as a government center, to help with these kind of dialogues. So I'm really happy that we're having this kind of discussion and engagement. And in the chat, there's some really interesting, very interesting comments. I do want to get to another set of questions from Laura Barangua. She asked here, given the low community willingness to grow indigenous trees on farms, would a national policy that designates a quota for indigenous trees, say 1 tree out of 4 should be indigenous, could that help as a policy? So I want to open it up to who might want to respond to that from the panel, and then we can also ask from the audience. I do want to mention that I'm not sure there's been we have data on willingness, whether there's been research quantifying community willingness, which is a really interesting question. And if there are data, let us know and let's share that information. So who would like to address Laura's question here? Anybody from the panel or from the audience? Go ahead and unmute. Nobody wants to take a stab at that.
Okay, maybe Beth, if I can just jump in. I see not
Thank you.
Everyone wants to come in, but it's good to start from the political will, which is already there, as Dr. Ivan mentioned. But mind you, from some studies we conducted in this country, most of them, if I am not too exaggerating, but 99% of all the policies are written in English and they are online. I don't know who would access them to change the behavior of the farmers and the things. So I guess the political will is there, but we really need an on-ground strategy and action more than we need to sit in big hotels and draft new strategy, because we have good agroforestry strategy. Atanas can mention this done by FAO and ACRAF and the government institution, but the execution of these policies is where the problem lies. Over.
Great, yeah. That's a really good point. And Laura suggesting it was something like an incentive, well, a quota, but I was turning that into, is there a way to put that into an incentive on the ground, which helps to meet government policy and incentivizes farmers to do that, to plant native species. So feel free if somebody wants to add on to that. I'm going to move on, but if somebody wants to unmute and comment, you're welcome. There's a question for Alain. This comes from Letizia from REMA. Was research done on farmers' perceptions on agroforestry trees? So I think it's research that Alain, you mentioned. If yes, I can understand why for them, productivity and profitability are considered high for exotic species. But as Michel Massa said, we don't have sufficient scientific knowledge on native species in Rwanda to say that related profitability and productivity is low, do we? So she's kind of challenging us. Do we have that information? So Alain, and then if anybody else wants to add.
Maybe other colleagues will help me, but I trust the market forces. if you don't see something trending on the market, and if it cannot flow without any enforcement, then there is a gap. So I would say if you don't see these native tree species in wood industry in the country, then it's an evidence that somewhere something is not working. So I mentioned the problem in supply chains, but also in addition to that, we have data on the growth rates of some of these indigenous tree species, and it's an evidence. It's actually an established opinion that most of them are actually slow growing. So, but Atan has mentioned some which are fast growing, like Vernonia, Amygdalina, but those are really shrubs, and farmers have actually kept them, those few ones in their landscapes, because of the medicinal and other purposes. But yeah, let me end there. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. I think I can come in. I think I don't know why Ale didn't mention that. I think ICN did a very important work on cost and benefit when you have, for example, a coriander with maize, when you have Lucina and the other species with maize, or compared to the traditional method where there is no agroforestry species. They found that when you have agroforestry species with maize or with other crop, there is the cost benefit is high, is above 1, or it is around 3. And that is show how when you promote, for example, agroforestry species, it gives higher return to the farmer in terms of, for example, if we consider Arinosa Kiminata with beans, when you have stakes combined to produce a stake for climb beans, the cost benefit is high. That is the package. The manual is the agroforestry package in agroforestry system. That is to show that there is benefit behind. But the study also we conduct on tree-based ecosystem service. It shows some economic benefits when you consider a tree like a graveria. That is why you found that graveria, when you see on the market, on the timber market, you found that agroforestry species like a graveria is dominated to the market. So, which means that is why farmer in Eastern Province are attracted by planting more graveria than other species. Also, when you see a study also done on, I think Marcamia rutea and Zera serrata.
Oh, sorry, somebody needs to mute.
Zera serrata.
Sorry, somebody can mute. That sounds like Chantal. Okay, go ahead.
When you consider those species like Marcamia rutea on the market, you found that the timber, the cost is very high than other timber like graveria or other exotic timber. That shows that these species have a value on the market, but promotion to be massive like graveria it is, that is another issue to mobilize the farmer to plant more Marcamia, to plant more Mesopsis semeni. But if some study are there highlighting the benefit, the profitability of other species. Without mention other benefit associated to this tree, like honey, like mushroom, other benefit the farmer got when you plant those indigenous species or exotic species in the landscape. Thank you.
Good, thank you. I don't know if anybody, yeah, Johan, go ahead.
If I can come in here a little bit, I just want to express the interest from our side doing this research on climate responses of different tree species that we're very interested in working with all of you that want to promote this and that are working, for example, at RFA or iCraft or at the sawmill or in the industry, because from our perspective, it seems that some of the indigenous species, they have really high growth rates, and they can also cope with heat, and some of them can also cope with a prolonged dry season. So maybe working together, we could set up some trials, test these species in different settings. We could share our data on relative growth rates and establishment success and mortality and so on. It seems that the more fast-growing species are also often the ones that are more easy to propagate and that also establish well. So we have very low mortality in the first part of during the first year for most species. I don't know if you want to say something more on this line, Göran and Bonaventure, that I can see here, that have worked most with growth and mortality data.
Well, what I can add is, in my perspective, it's extremely important to know what actually the farmers or the local users, what they use the trees for, what kind of properties they actually look for, because in a perspective from a tree physiologist like us, then we can sort of suggest to replace exotic species if we know what more exactly what the local people are looking for. So I think that's I wonder if there is any sort of more extensive summary or investigation surveys on what the local people actually look for when they select trees to plant or save.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know, Bonaventure, if you wanted to add something related to your research on growth.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to add that according to my observation done on a farm field with farmers, farmers are interested in native tree species because sometimes, if we take an example of Harungana madagascarensis, they leave some trees in farm field because of taxi production, of firewood, and something. So they are aware of this species because the species is very interesting, and the growth rate is very, very fast. And it was one example, but you can find some native species on the farm field because they are aware that even exotic species grow quickly, but they take into consideration of some native species which are very important for them. And so if you can give them opportunity to maintain them or to propagate them, they are ready to cooperate with you. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think I can share with Joan the report of dialogue we have with elder people, with Nyamagabe and Nyaruguru about indigenous species. So there is a list I think I can share with him what these elder people listed as a preferred species. Thank you. Over to you, Beth.
Thank you.
Yeah, you know, what I'm noticing here is there's a tremendous amount of knowledge in this virtual room in terms of the tree physiology and knowledge about tree growth and tree mortality, about community knowledge about trees, and also traditional knowledge and the economic aspects. I know there's a colleague who recently finished his PhD, Concord from IPRC, Kitabi, who studied carbon sequestration rates. And I know often Klaas in the timber industry is talking about that aspect. So we're starting to have a lot of knowledge now that I think, as people have been emphasizing, needs to come together. And I also noticed a kind of a thread in some of the comments had to do with some interesting if I can say, like, clashes or differences of what might be going on here with the integration of native trees. So some people are arguing that people want exotic species, they don't want native species. Other people are saying that people do want native species and they do have knowledge about native species, but it's an issue of access of the seeds or the seedlings, or support to grow them. Some people are saying that people in these forests or communities around these forests don't have enough knowledge, and other people are saying they do have the knowledge. So clearly there are some areas of contention and areas where we need to really be demonstrating the information that we do have in order to move forward on this topic. And I actually think it's really exciting to see the contention that's going on, the sort of tension in what we know and what we think we know. And yeah, I noticed Emmanuel Munyaneza had some really interesting comments about the local knowledge that people have, and that they may be receiving some pressure to grow certain species, like exotic species, over indigenous or native species. And also, Massa Zera mentioned that there hasn't been enough research to know which species could adapt well in agricultural land. This is somewhat related to what some of you on the just now were saying, that there are some data coming out showing certain species could do well. Let's see, there's an interesting discussion towards the end here about what we do know, some of the data that we do have. And some people were advocating a mix of exotic and native species. I saw Pollinator William was also mentioning that. And what's also, I wanted to mention, in terms of the knowledge that's here, we do have some people that have done research with what farmers know and what they want, and what can help them in terms of their practices. That was one, partly Pollinator research, Pollinator Williams, some of his research for his PhD dealt with that as well. So I'm just emphasizing there's a lot of knowledge in this virtual room that I think if we could put together into maybe a policy brief or what we know, what we don't know about these issues, could be very interesting. And there seems to be a real interest and readiness for putting some collaborative research teams together. And I like the fact that we're representing, agriculture, agroforestry, forest ecology, and conservation science, and social sciences and economics is probably the best way that we can use to tackle these problems. So I'd like to open it up now. I went through the comments, and there was some interesting back and forth between people in the room, but I do want to ask, anybody else want to raise question or mention a question that is that what you already posted in the chat? You can feel free, because I may have missed or skipped over some. So I'd just like to open it up. You can raise your hand, unmute, and we'd love to hear from you. We have maybe about 10 more minutes, because we can end this at 5. We have a recording. We're going to capture all these comments. So I do hope we can take some next steps. But for now, who would like to raise other? Yeah, Laure, let's go, Laure, and then Apollinaire. And yeah, you're welcome, Laure.
Thanks, Beth. It's just a simple suggestion. There's a lot of interesting documents that have been mentioned in this talk. Some research by the University of Rwanda students, but also some work by ICRAF, IUCN. So if there will be a way to share those documents, at least the titles, either on this platform or on the consultation group. I think it would be helpful.
Good, yeah, thank you. I'm just taking a note on your comment. I think we can create a little repository in, say, Google Doc folder and then share the link with everybody. Thanks for that suggestion. So we'll go to Apollinaire William now and then to Franklin. So you're welcome, Apollinaire.
Thank you very much, Beth. I was really fascinated by the talk today and the discussion that has been going on. I truly believe that communities can adopt the indigenous species, but again, it depends on their goals and objectives. So if you overlook their goals, then it cannot be successful. I also mentioned the incentives because of as Zera said, the land size per household is very tiny and is still dwindling. And so farmers cannot just afford planting trees on the land where they rely on food crops. But one big addition I want to add is that maybe we need to create a platform that will be multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder, where we can have a regular technical exchange on how the propagation and promotion of indigenous species can be more successful. And then we can continue this conversation. And you could see how people were excited in exchanging on the chats and also asking questions and making comments. But I think if we could make this like some kind of formal or standardized or regular, I think we might come up with a long-term sustainable solution to this problem. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, William. And we'll make sure we share your dissertation with people because you did some good work looking at smallholder farmer knowledge and interest in ecosystem services and climate change. So I think Franklin had his hand up, but I don't know if he maybe fell out of the meeting. Franklin, are you here?
Yes, I'm there, Professor.
Great, go ahead.
Thank you, Professor. I'm very happy for the presentation of the panelists because it is a related research I'm carried out in a book, mainly in Congo, DRC, and I plan to carry out it in Rwanda and even possible in Burundi. I'm working on indigenous species in Albertine Rift, and I'm very pleased with the presentation, mainly from Dr. Miriam, from Gothenburg University and so on. But I would like to suggest, according to what I had made in the DR Congo, it's important before adopting any system or any indigenous tree species, we should know first what are farmers' preferences. So in the case of Rwanda, sometimes I have questions. I have my own questions. Why people prefer only exotic one in Rwanda? If you read a paper of Bastian, it was 2019, it said that Rwanda is one of the countries in Africa who have a high reforestation rate, but unfortunately, is done by exotic one. And this can't restore biodiversity, as we come to learn from our panelists. Then I could say it is very important to know first the farmer's view. We had some studies with Professor Aida, and we published a paper. It was 2019, I think. And there it's important to know first what are farmers' preference. And it's important to talk with local people because there are some species which are not adopted by a local because there are some barriers. So I think, to my point of view, this study could be very important in Rwanda if we can ask on again also farmers according to their preference. Thank you for panelists. Thank you, Professor Beth.
Great, thank you. And as Franklin mentioned, he's another wealth of knowledge here on this platform with the research he's been doing in Congo and soon in Burundi and Rwanda on native species in agroforestry and forestry. So I saw Anders and then Sarah. And then Delphine. Yeah. Anders, you can go ahead and unmute.
Hello. Hello there.
Welcome.
Back to the word farmers' willingness to embrace indigenous species. I think it's there, and it's a valid argument. However, what's in it for the farmer, and how can he get access to all those indigenous species? They're not there. He has to collect himself. That's the option. And what is available is completely unimproved material. That means most of the material available is, I mean, for the indigenous species, it's completely unimproved. It's degraded, genetic deteriorated material where we get the leftovers, what is left in the landscape. So if indigenous species should have a chance to be competitive, we need to do tree improvement on some of them so they can grow faster and straighter and be more competitive to the exotics. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And Anders also has a lot of...
Sorry.
Go ahead. Yes, please.
Yes, I think it is the question of Rwanda Forestry Authority to provide improve the tree reproductive material, and we are working on it. We are promoting native species, and we hope getting authorization to collect tree seeds in the natural forest, and this question will be solved very soon, because as our colleague from RDC mentioned, there is also need to cooperate with farmers, not only to take into consideration the preference in tree species, but also suggest which species can grow where can respond to they need very quickly. And so I think this question will be solved very soon. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I would like to go to Sarah Mueller, and then to Delphine Mudashamagira.
Yes, hello. This is Sarah from Chamudomo Project. I'm here with my colleague Theogen, and he actually has a question.
Welcome, Theogen.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I would first thank for the preparation of this good conversation. And yes, I would like first to say that I will need at last to hear from Rwanda Forest Authority promising, because I have seen that most of points were pointing them to do something, and I would like to hear them if they are promising to do something from this after this talk about this convincing, talking to farmers what they want and what are the native species that are currently available in the community so they can be prioritized and then promoted. And from there, those species, I do agree with the people that are saying that these species needs to be appearing in public lands. Not all public lands, because of course we need those public lands are there for some purposes, but you need to see some native species from there, and then we get convinced that this is working, and people around they be convinced also to start doing this. Otherwise, it's not easy to convince a farmer with a small plot of land to plant some species while the neighboring public land is almost eucalyptus. And And the last point to mention is also this Miriam and the rest of the team of this research to let us to say some species in their names, what you can go and test. As we said, this is Chamdongo project. We are also doing the same. We have some species we are promoting, but from this research, if they mention these names, either 3 or 4 names, then you can start testing this and we see also if it is working. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So Delphine and then Miriam. Oh, but sorry, I think, yeah, Teogen actually asked a question of Ivan at Rwanda Forestry Authority. So maybe before Delphine, can we see if Ivan wants to respond? Teogen is asking, are you going to do any actions following up on these comments in this panel? He's putting you on the spot.
Yes, thank you, Beth, and thank you, Teogen, for the question. Yes, that is quite a relevant one, because we need to actually plant trees where they are supposed to be. Where they're supposed to be is where they are needed and required. But again, we also have to consider not only the farmers' desires and wants, because they might want a certain species that probably might not even grow there. That is why we need science and the social sciences work and the science itself, or the tree physiology and everything around it working together. But yes, we have been working on the desires. What are the farmers want? What kind of tree species do they want? In the projects that I told you earlier that we are working on, but not only should we be working on the community's knowledge and wants and desires only in those specific regions where the projects are operating, but also even in the rest of the country. So yes, that's a challenge that we are getting out of this discussion, to actually understand the people's, preferences of the species. But of course, the preference of the species has to go together with the practicability of it, whether they can actually grow in those areas. And raising up to the question that probably was raised by Anders, yes, the availability of tree reproductive materials is coming back again. Yes, like the colleague Bonam put it out clearly, we have been working on the availability of native species. It has been a little challenging because they're only left in these protected areas, and accessibility to these areas, there are quite a number of channels that you have to go through. And but we are getting these materials not only in these protected areas, but you remember earlier mentioned about the remnant forests that are distributed around, where we get some of these materials. Some of them are in our nurseries. We are growing them, and some of them have actually sprout out, and they are being transplanted in the experimental fields in Arboretum, that is the forest in our area, that is CoEB, for those who know it. And we are also hoping to get the materials that we can plant in the Eastern Province, where, because of course you know that the climatic and geographical areas are different in terms of climate and landscape. So the Eastern Province has its own nurseries with its different species where we will be growing, and the southern area where we have already established the experimental plots with some of these tree species that we are talking about. So as time goes by, we hope that we will have all the required tree native species. I earlier told you about the list of the native species that we have collected, we have gathered and put together, that we intend to actually multiply and grow in our landscapes once they actually, grow in the nurseries, so that they can be transplanted and planted in different landscapes. So yes, the two challenges of getting the tree reproductive materials, we get it, and we're working on it, as well as the people's preference of tree species that has to be worked on together with Rwanda Forest Authority and the colleagues in the room. We're working on it. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Ivan. So we are after 5, a few minutes after 5. Delphine, do you want to make a comment or question? Welcome.
Okay, thank you, Beth. I just want to give a suggestion about the issue raised by Dr. Ivan from Rwanda Forest Authority, that they try to produce seedlings by establishing tree nurseries in different districts of our country. So my suggestion is that they also need to collaborate or to work hand in hand with other institutions. For example, the IPRC Kitabi, we do offer courses related to forest resources management, and probably some competencies are related to tree nursery establishment. In that case, if we collaborate, those seedlings can be produced along the course delivery or during the final year project of the student. In that case, I'm sure that at the end of each year, a good number of seedlings of those indigenous tree species can be produced and be distributed to the local community, for example, through community outreach activities, or maybe another scheme can be determined. But this can be a good option or a good possibility in order to avail the higher number of those required tree seedlings. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you, Delphine. That's excellent. I was going to ask you what institution you're with, so IPRC Kitabi, and I love how you're making a connection between, policy and what the government may want for forestry, and how academia and training young people can be brought together. So that's really a fantastic suggestion, and we'll make sure we note that down and bring it back up again. And so I would like to turn it over to Miriam. You have your hand up.
Thank you very much, Beth. I want to just come back to the comment of Franklin and Theogene. I'll try to be brief. Franklin was raising the question that we need to first understand the farmer's preference about these native tree species before studying them. I think it's a good point, but also we need to know that farmers can know the profitability and also in terms of productivity for these species, but their knowledge about how the different species are suitable to different environmental areas, it's limited. That's why I think it's also important to explore the suitability of different species, native species, and all the studies in this Rwanda Tree Project are exploring the suitability in terms of the physiology, but also growth and mortality, to see how different species might be suitable to different regions of Rwanda. Coming back to Theogene of Chamudongo, asking whether we can highlight some species by names. It's a good point. Theogene, you can find out our publications on Rwanda Tree website. I think that has been posted in the chat. Some publications on physiological responses are already there, and the growth publications are to come soon, but also we are happy to collaborate and to share that you can always contact us. Thank you very much.
All right, great. Thanks, Miriam. I really appreciate those comments. So I think we have come to the end of our panel. We've gone over a little bit, but it was worth it. I made sure, Vana, I hope you've captured all of these comments, and we're going to put these together. We'll figure out a way that we can share them with everybody, whether it's through a kind of simple report or maybe a kind of policy brief that we'll do together with some of the main panelists and stakeholders here and share it with everybody. And I'm glad that we have the rwandatree.com link here and some of the colleagues' comments. So this was recorded, and we always post the recordings of these center seminars at our CoEB YouTube channel, and we'll be sharing the link for you when that is cleaned up and ready to be posted. And I just want to thank everybody once again for attending and participating. The panel was really great. I thank all of the 8 panelists that we had, Marguerite and Ivan, Klaas, Atanaz, and Miriam, Johan, Michel, and Alan. Thank you all very much for taking time from your busy days to join this panel. Thanks to all of you in the audience for posting questions and also for talking. And this is how we can really advance and share knowledge. So I don't have anything else to add right here, just to thank you all again. And I hope you have a great afternoon thinking about native tree species and our knowledge about how we can get them back into some of these landscapes. So thank you all very much, and bye for now.